I was invited by your membership to speak to the issues relating to St. Lucia's engagement on the Petro-Caribe agreement. Originally, it was my intention to preface my discussion this afternoon by providing you with a broad overview of the economy and its current performance to set the full fiscal context underpinning government's decision to pursue those arrangements. However, I have made myself available to the Chamber at its upcoming annual general meeting to provide an update on the economy and the challenges that we face. As such, we will pursue a focused and narrow discourse today, since we are likely to meet again in another 3 weeks. At the outset, I must dispel the political conjecture and propaganda that these arrangements in any way impact St. Lucia's sovereignty or St. Lucia's commitment to regional integration at the CARICOM or OECS levels. Nor would they undermine St. Lucia's ranking, trust, and ability to speak freely in the world. All governments, from the poorest to the wealthiest, must take decisions that in the best interests of their country, in the best interests of sound, sustainable development, and in the interests of satisfying the just and reasonable aspirations of the people. We are not an exception. We may not be responsible for how we got to where we are. We did not set the course of our history on our own. However, we do have the non-negotiable responsibility to set the course of our future. Since independence, St. Lucia, much like the rest of the former British West Indies, has maintained our traditional socioeconomic tilt towards trade dependence with our partners in the north, principally the United Kingdom, our former colonial rulers, and the United States of America, the world's superpower for the time being. We share with the United States elements of a common history in slavery, a common language, and a common backyard. The traditional partners of the North will remain, but like them, we too cannot remain stagnant in a model of the world set in what is now antiquity. The rise of the Southern powers is well on the way, and so have emerged new global powers in Asia and Latin America. Our horizons here in St. Lucia, in a post-global financial crisis era, must be broadened in all directions as we witness the leveling of wealth around our sphere. By the design of the international community, we are already grouped into a region defined as Latin America and the Caribbean, notwithstanding our traditionally strong ties with the United States and Canada. In the case of Canada, it is clear that it is a relationship that is now fraught with uncertainty. It means that while we must maintain strong socioeconomic and political ties to our allies in the North, on which our trade, investment, and economic viability still rely, we must also begin to diversify our economic partnerships beyond the traditions of the past. Even so, the Caribbean was once quite connected with our Latin American neighbors in the not-too-distant past. The South American continent was once seen as a land of opportunity and trade, from the Guyanas to the Brazil to Panama. Venezuela is also within this mix. Venezuela has a Caribbean outlook as it lies along the Caribbean Sea. It has long been a partner with St. Lucia, having established diplomatic relations shortly after our independence in 1979. This reawakening of our ties with our friends in Latin America is an important element in our future economic development, as was highlighted in the foreign policy review undertaken by a team headed by former Prime Minister and Professor Emeritus of International Relations, Dr. Vaughan Lewis. Our traditional partners have decidedly moved away from grant financing despite all our known vulnerabilities. We have been fortunate to have had the new National Hospital funded primarily by European Union grants, but this is not the case for St. Jude, where the government has in fact borne the brunt of the costs so far. The National Hospital resulted in elevated grant financing during the period 2009-2010 to 2012-2013, averaging over 2% of GDP. However, for the decade and a half before that, grant funding was well under 1% of GDP per year. The European Union has also indicated that the Banana Accompanying Measures, or BAM for short, to be implemented over the next 5 years will be the last in a series of structural adjustment funds. While the United States provides Israel and its friendly neighbors, Jordan and Egypt, grants in the region of 1.5% of their GDP, U.S. government grant funding has continued to dwindle in our region. Thus, Israel, a developed state, may receive over US $400 per person, whereas St. Lucia, a vulnerable small island developing state, received in the region of US $3.50 per person this year. This is the political reality of our world. This is our harsh reality. And so our financial realities must be approached with pragmatism, open-mindedness, and certainly without naivety. The suggestions to continue with the country's development agenda thus far have been to induce foreign direct investment through PPPs in sectors that may be seen as lucrative, such as seaports and airport development, hotels, renewable energy, housing, and real estate. In fact, we have been receiving much assistance from the International Financial Cooperation, IFC, in this area. However, in the meantime, we need to ponder this question. How will we be able to finance social or riskier investments to support and grow sectors such as agriculture, social housing, and education in the medium term before such PPPs induce more sustainable and positive growth rates? Let us face it, large primary surpluses are unlikely in the near future. And this is why ALBA and Petro Caribe are crucial to bettering our ability to deliver on development imperatives. At the heart of Petro Caribe is a concept of low-interest financing. Venezuela has said this to its Caribbean partners, and here I am translating and transmuting the essence of the conversation. We know you struggle with high cost of fuel and the impact it has in every facet of your economies. We know that the high cost of fuel is a major contributor to inflationary pressures. To illustrate this trend, in 2000, Lucelec, the largest single consumer of diesel in this country, paid on average $2.86 per imperial gallon. A decade later, in 2012, the average going rate was $10.59, a near fourfold increase. Even with hedging, such fuel dependence maintains the Caribbean as one of the highest, if not the highest, energy cost region in the world. The Venezuelan position continues by saying, we know that energy costs are a large part of your import bill and greatly impacts your current account deficit. For instance, in the case of St. Lucia last year, we imported the equivalent of over 1.4 million barrels of fuel, generally in the form of diesel, gasoline, and LPG. Using CIF prices as our basis, last year our country imported mineral fuels in the order of EC $300 million, or about 8% of GDP. So you can see that we have a monumental bill on our hands. Our energy costs continue to grow and greatly impact the cost of transport, electricity, and in one way or the other, nearly all our transactions. For instance, the cost of our food production is tied to fertilizer costs, a byproduct of petroleum. Every time our fishers set out to sea, their outboard engines are dependent on imported fuels. And these days, they're not too happy with me because the price has gone up. Venezuela, on the other hand, is a hydrocarbon supergiant. It possesses vast oil and gas reserves, some of, if not the largest in the world. It produces an estimated 2.47 million barrels of oil a day. It is the fourth largest supplier of oil products to the United States of America, exporting in the region of 1.4 million barrels a day to the United States. Our very own sister state of Trinidad and Tobago, the only major oil and gas exporter in CARICOM, is presently negotiating with Venezuela a natural gas deal. Why then is there so much resistance in some quarters? Is it really based on reason and logic? Venezuela is also saying, we understand how your current economic model can cause hardship for your people and increase indebtedness. We will help you by allowing you to be part of the energy supply chain and as a trusted partner with a vested interest and benefit, and allow you generous credit terms on what is a major part of your costs, fuel. We have been a signatory to Petro-Caribe since June of 2005, but sadly, we never activated our membership. Since then, a number of countries throughout our region have enjoyed the benefits of Petro-Caribe. So we are an unfortunate latecomer to this endeavor. Whereas we could have been benefiting for over 5 years now, we unfortunately have been without this very beneficial financial facility. So, what is involved in this energy cooperation agreement? At the heart of it is the establishment of a Venezuela-St. Lucia bilateral fund, or a Petro-Caribe Development Fund, as it is known in some Petro-Caribe countries. The arrangements require the establishment of a joint venture company or entity responsible for the operations and sale of Petro-Caribe products in St. Lucia. These, of course, could be a wide number of hydrocarbon byproducts, diesel, gasoline, LPG, kerosene, lubricants, and so forth. Products would be sold to the joint venture company based on the going rate for these products by PDVSA, Venezuela's oil national company. PDV Caribe, the subsidiary company of PDVSA, is responsible for arranging logistics, planning, and coordination, including transport, storage, and distribution systems. The joint venture company would then apply its markup for operating costs and profits and sell the product on to the distributors or bulk purchasers, more than likely through the existing channels. In the case of St. Lucia, the proposed bulk purchase could, and I'm underlining the word could, be Lucelec and existing distributors, namely Rubis and Sol. These are, of course, details that will have to be worked out with respect to these companies and their existing purchase commitments from other suppliers. The proportion of the value of oil products to be provided concessionary finances varies with the price of oil. In fact, it becomes more generous as the price of oil gets higher. I should repeat this point for clarity. As the price of oil goes up, our ability to seek concessionary financing increases. So therefore, for our purposes, consider the average price of oil set between US $100 and $150 per barrel. This would attract of up to 60% concessionary financing. In fact, if we were to be more conservative, we can say that the price of oil has rarely fallen below US $80 a barrel. This means that using this basis, St. Lucia would be eligible for concessionary financing of between 50 and 60% of the cost at a rate of 2% over a 25-year period. And I just want to emphasize that rate, 2% over a 25-year period. Further to this, each country is allowed a 2-year grace period before which it begins repayments. Each participating country is given a quota of oil products it can consume under the Petro-Caribe agreement. For example, Dominica and St. Vincent have quotas of 1 million barrels per annum. The joint venture company will sell oil products to the local market. This direct line is likely to translate into modest savings for the consumer, whether through a somewhat lower electricity fuel surcharge or a lower price at the pump. There will still be markups for the distributors and the dealers and excise tax collected by central government. However, what will happen is that the joint venture company will be in a position to also make a profit. These profits will then be plowed back into the economy through grant financing or towards paying off the long-term liabilities. The joint venture company, within 90 days, will repay between 40 to 50% of PDVSA for the oil it has purchased, depending on the prevailing price of oil. And so the balance goes into the fund for purposes of financing of future development. PDVSA has proposed, and I underline the word proposed because discussions are ongoing, that the joint venture company will then remit 50 to 60% of the payments collected into the bilateral fund for concessionary financing. And I'm going to stick a pin there just a little minute. I want each and every one of you here today to understand the realities of the financial markets we are now operating in. It is now exceedingly difficult to raise money in our regional markets. Why? Because of the battering that the governments have been taking in the past year. There is a massive loss of confidence in government instruments. As you know, Antigua has had to go to the route of the IMF, is only now emerged out of it, leaner but fragile. St. Kitts is now totally embraced by the IMF. It too is planning to emerge leaner, but at a huge cost because there's had to be major haircuts in respect of the instruments in St. Kitts. Likewise, Grenada is now negotiating its way into the IMF. In fact, they have a debt conference in the next couple of days, and they've asked some of us to come and sit with them during that conference to offer whatever salutary advice that one can give. I'm not even too sure I can offer any. But I guess I have a duty. To complicate the situation, it's the challenges that our banking sector now has to face. As you know, I wear the hat of the chairperson of the Monetary Council, but also the chairman of the Banking Committee. So I get a good sense of the performance of banks across the region. The picture is not pretty. We had to go into Anguilla and take over 2 of the national banks in Anguilla. This is going to require millions of dollars to recapitalize those banks. You know what happened in Antigua with Habib and other banks. And the contagion, if we do not take very strong action, can spread. That is why you and I have the most delicate period in our entire history to manage. It is difficult. It is difficult. And I'm hoping that when I have the opportunity to address you for your annual conference, we can go into these matters in greater detail. So, in this kind of environment, concessionary financing is vital, that's my point. And we must search out for it wherever we can obtain it, once we do not have to sell our souls. That's the point. We are currently negotiating the establishment of a separate social investment fund, which can be used to fund public sector initiatives, whether in social matters, housing, in agriculture, education, or community infrastructure. We are proposing that this social investment fund be allotted a lower rate of interest of 1%, with the cost of additional repayment borne from the returns from investments on the bilateral fund. This model addresses the concerns of the Venezuelans about the sustainability of the fund while reducing the bureaucracy in accessing financing. We believe it is a model that is a significant improvement on the existing one, as it reduces on the hazard of debt accumulation while retaining the facility for funding much-needed social projects. We are anxious to avoid any debt accumulation. The monies that are deposited into the bilateral fund would be managed by a board with representation from both St. Lucia and Venezuela. Projects out of this fund would have to be geared towards meeting national development goals and would have to be directed towards the productive sector. In effect, the funds would have to be invested into projects, programs, or ventures that will yield positive rates of return. In effect, it can become a low-interest credit facility which can go towards a host of potential investments. For example, a portion of the fund can go towards establishing a green energy fund, allowing businesses to get the affordable capital to make investments in renewable energy and energy efficiency. Such use of the fund would be in keeping with our long-term goal to become more energy secure. Funding could perhaps also be directed to St. Lucia's involvement in regional travel and shipping facility or capacity. We know there has been much talk of an inter-island ferry and better trade links. This could potentially be realized with the existence of this fund. A number of state agencies or corporations might be able to access soft loans for infrastructural investments. SLASPA might see the possibility of utilizing this fund for port redevelopment. WASCO might undertake a major network improvement project. The fund might wish to direct some of its resources towards the development of SMEs through the provision of low-interest loans. Such a fund could certainly be of importance to farmers who often struggle to get agricultural loans. Such a fund would require the involvement of a locally licensed financial institution, possibly the St. Lucia Development Bank, which can ensure that due diligence and risk management protocols are maintained and that the fund is managed profitably with sufficient oversight arrangement. The hope is that the fund would realize returns in the region of at least 4 to 6%, so that the credit facility can be paid down. It is fully in our national interest to ensure that it runs sustainably. Surplus profits could, of course, be kept to bolster the fund's long-term operations. This fund could be a much-needed boost to the private sector that is already suffering from tight credit conditions. The benefits to the government are also rather obvious. The first benefit to government is in the low interest rates and the lengthy repayment periods. If the Ministry of Finance goes out today to borrow monies on the Regional Government Securities Market, the RGSM, they may fetch a 6% interest payment over an 8-year period. You can automatically see that the repayments would begin piling up very quickly into the future, and with relatively large repayments. For every $10 in liability taken out each year against the proposed bilateral fund, the result is a manageable repayment of about $66,000 per month. Government is therefore provided with a new line of concessionary financing, just like the opportunities that will be provided to the private sector through the bilateral fund. As would be said by the IMF, the quality of our financing would be improved. Of course, I am sure a number of you are already wondering what scale of funding would be generated from Petro Caribe. it would be good for us to look at a few scenarios. As I indicated, there are three principal opportunities, and I want to summarize them again for ease of reference. The first is the generation of grant funding through profits to be directed towards targeted non-refundable projects and programs. Secondly, there is low-interest concessionary financing for social programs. And thirdly, productive sector concessionary financing that would have to be targeted to projects that must generate reasonable returns. The ability to achieve each of these would be determined by the size of the local market, the projected market share of the joint venture company, the anticipated profit markup by the joint venture company, the extent of relief the government would wish to provide to the consumer, which is, of course, inversely related to the profit markup. I know there are still those who may be wondering whether this sounds too good to be true. Well, being so late in the game, we have the benefit of seeing the impacts that have resulted in other countries. On previous occasions, I have highlighted the benefits of ALBA and Petro Caribe to Dominica. Today I shall choose Jamaica merely to illustrate that even the most populous English-speaking economy in the Caribbean has benefited immensely. Jamaica has been accessing Petro Caribe since 2006, passing legislation establishing its setting up that same year. Jamaica has benefited from US $2.4 billion in financing from their Petro Caribe Development Fund. The government of Jamaica has used funds associated with Petro Caribe for several projects, including the following: expansion and upgrade of the country's road network, upgrading of the Norman Manley International Airport, expansion of the port infrastructure, refinancing domestic public sector debt to prevent job losses and agency closures, support to state corporations, support for the public transportation system, including the Jamaican Urban Transit Company, JUTC, and the construction of the Halfway Tree Transit Hub, the Petrojam Refinery Upgrade Project, which saw Venezuela purchase 49% of the shares in the refinery in 2008, and investments in social infrastructure through the Jamaica Social Investment Fund. Lest you may think I'm exaggerating, allow me to quote an article from the Jamaica Gleaner of January 27, 2012, which brings home what can be done through this facility. And I'm quoting: "The National Export-Import Bank of Jamaica has signed a US $20 million loan agreement with the Petro Caribe Development Fund for on lending to small and medium-sized businesses in the productive sector. An immediate spin-off of the loan is that SMEs operating in the productive sector will now be able to benefit from a new accelerated processing initiative, which allows them to access working capital within 5 working days for short-term loans and 15 working days for medium-term loans," Exim said in a statement on Wednesday. Businesses can access up to a maximum of Jamaica $40 million under the Accelerated Loan Program, which runs until March 30th. The Exim Bank said it was the 4th loan that it had successfully negotiated with the Petro Caribe Fund since its borrowing relationship began with that organization in 2007. I'm still reading from the Gleaner. Funds sourced from the PDF have primarily been used for the development of SMEs with export potential or which provide linkages to the tourism and export sectors. This capital injection will greatly boost Exim Bank's ability to continue discharging its mandate of providing competitively priced financing solutions to ensure that the private sector builds its competitiveness, increase trade, and most importantly, stimulate growth in the economy, the statement said. Unquote. However, even while we seek to finalize the legal and technical details to implement Petro Caribe, our membership in ALBA will help us to begin access grant funding to assist in our backlog of projects to be funded. I have already asked the Ministry of Infrastructure to begin engaging the Alba Caribbean Fund for funding for 3 bridges to be reconstructed in the Castries-Vieux-Fort Highway in the Mabuya Valley, and 2 other bridges in the south of the island between Vieux-Fort North and Micoud South. Today, you have also noticed at the head table, St. Lucia's recently appointed resident ambassador for Luncheon-Petro Caribe, Mr. Eustace Vitalis, in that blue shirt across there. A gentleman with much experience and training in project cycle management, agriculture, and creating linkages between agriculture and tourism. Crucially, he also speaks the principal languages of the South American continent, Portuguese and Spanish, having attended universities in Brazil and Cuba. I am sure as the weeks and months progress, you will hear from him regarding our rollout of the agreement. But of course, there are other reasons why we had to appoint him as ambassador, because we need to catch up and catch up very quickly. Time is of essence, of absolute essence where we are concerned. And one of his responsibilities is to go to the other countries, find out how they did it. For example, Jamaica, how they got that money for the private sector. So in the next few weeks, I'm sending him off to those countries to get models so that we can act and act very quickly. Ladies and gentlemen, opportunities are what you make of them. We have lost enough time dithering on whether or not Petro Caribe or Alba, as well as political energy debating its value. The current fiscal imperatives leave little doubt that our entry into these arrangements is warranted and will set us on a new path of positive engagement with the South. And so, I urge you to consider the number of pressing socio-economic imperatives of our country at this time. These may be summarized thus. And I'm itemizing our woes so that you understand what goes into the minds of decision makers, the challenges that we face. Reducing the fiscal imbalance and containing debt. Despite the fact that St. Lucia has possibly, at current figures, the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the Eastern Caribbean, we are taking blows because of the fiscal deficit. When investors look at our fiscal deficit, they cry, oh, how are you going to bring it down? That is why, on the financial side, it has to be a priority for us. 2, creating employment and stimulating economic activity. 3, promoting tourism competitiveness and product development. 4, energy and water security. 5, citizen security. 6, environmental sustainability. Championing food security and healthy living through expanding and modernizing our agriculture and fishery sector. Reforming our education sector to enable our youth to gain the skills, technical ability, and attitudes for a competitive world. And that's a battle sometimes I think we are losing. We've been saying that so many times. Reducing poverty and promoting social inclusion, not dependency. Providing a chance for entrepreneurs and SMEs to find capital and create new businesses, particularly through applying technological advantage. And finally, developing the resilient infrastructure for the future that will encourage growth in all economic sectors. The list, my friends, is a long one. This is a list to which we must be committed, even when it means navigating outside of our immediate comfort zones. It does, however, entreat that we nurture the bloom that arises from the fiscal desert currently sweeping this land. A few days ago, I had the privilege of handing out laptop computers to the Form 4 students at my old school, the Vieux-Fort Comprehensive Secondary School. It was a promise that we made in a campaign, and it is a promise kept. In a way, it was a liberating feeling because I felt so much more hopeful of the future. Because I believe that these children would embrace the powerful tool being given to them and use it to begin transforming their minds, and then their opportunities, and then their communities, and then their country. We owe it to our children to cast aside the politics, to push away those hardened, unjustified, antiquated philosophies and fears, and even furor, and to embrace the world together. either do it now or we never do it, given the crisis that faces us. And so, ladies and gentlemen, likewise today, I trust and really hope that your organization will see value in this effort, will support this effort, because it makes sense, because it is good for the country, because we want to see a brighter future, not a dimmer one. We must broaden our circles of solidarity without fear. I thank you for this opportunity to share perspectives with you on this important initiative. And now I hope I have given you sufficient time to ask any questions that you may wish to ask. Thank you very much. You've been a good audience.